Okay, so I have all these things that I wrote down, and then I was really listening to Carla, and I was thinking about my life, and I was thinking about the day. And so I'm going to do something totally different. Um, it's kind of how I roll. Um, and I'm going to start from the very beginning. So for me, we've heard the land acknowledgement, and thank you for that. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. Shout out to Jean Becker, who taught me that what I have to do individually to move the land acknowledgement from a place of simply acknowledging the land, which I can Google, and to a place of change, is to reflect on the reality that I'm having a particular conversation on stolen land. And so here I am on land held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral people, with the topic of conversation, ways in which we are intimidated when we try to do the change work. And to me, the connection is in that. I don't know if folks remember this in the way that I'm remembering it, but I remember when the notion of reconciliation was new. And then a little bit after that, we started to say reconciliation. And I think to myself, because I do talk to myself, I'm like, why would Indigenous communities have to stress action? Like, why did reconciliation never include action for non-Indigenous people that were saying that they were part of the movement and wanted to be part of the cause? And so if I sit with that and I think about this particular conversation, I'm actually brought back to a particular moment. Shortly after the attack, I was actually still a member of provincial parliament. And so my office was contacted to participate in the discussion that was happening. There was a gathering that was happening. I can't remember the exact words of it, but it was on the steps of the library. That was like the administration was organizing that. And at the same time, there was another discussion that was happening in front of Haggie Hall, or as close to Haggie Hall as they could get. And that was being led by the students. And I was actually invited to both. And so I showed up, figured out where the library was. I get lost very easily. So if you do see me, just roll me to a place that looks like I should be there. And so my team helped me. I got to the steps and I was participating in that discussion. And it was very difficult. It was difficult to watch because I was a member of provincial parliament, and as somebody who's coming into this institute, it was 2 days before I was going to join my colleagues. And I knew, because I was also the critic for colleges and universities, the kinds of pressures that are on the university when they're trying to do work. And one of those pressures is this notion of free speech. And some of the political folks, politicians and such, have a particular understanding of what free speech means and what it should mean on a university campus. And depending on where you are, that can open up dialogue that is useful and pertinent and important, or it can be extremely harmful, and especially for particular people who are doing particular kind of research and enter into that research from particular spaces. As my mummy says, stick a pin in that, because I was also invited to where the students were. And the students were organizing at the exact same time purposefully with very concrete demands. They wanted to be heard, they wanted to be seen, and they wanted the folks that were like, I'm not saying this dismissively, but in my head, it was like the grown-up table. They wanted the folks that were in charge of them to see the flags. Like, no violence happens just out of nowhere. So if I go back to my land acknowledgement and I go back to this reflection about why do Indigenous communities have to force non-Indigenous communities to recognize that action is required for change, it's also like, did you see the flags? Did you notice all of the things that we were warning about before the violence hit? As a Black woman in an anti-Black world, and I'll say that again, louder for the people in the back. As a Black woman in an anti-Black world, When I walk into this space, whether it was the political space in my former life or this space right here on campus, there is already a number of assumptions that I am encountering that are left unsaid. Sometimes it's who does or doesn't talk to me. Sometimes it's the question about why I am where I am. Sometimes it's the person that's following me around while I'm doing stuff. But there is an assumption about who I am and how I'm going to be and what I'm going to say and what I'm going to do. And there's judgment on that assumption. And that's a whole number of things then. That means that I, Laura May, am accustomed to sort of assessing in every room that I go into. And when I'm on a university campus in particular, because there's this notion of free speech and there's this notion of academic desire to learn more and to grow and all of that, I raise these kinds of issues in my scholarship, I raise them in my classroom, I raise them with my colleagues. And oftentimes the initial response is to dismiss the things that I have flagged. Those flags that I've seen are dismissed. And we're hearing that from a lot of the students that were impacted in particular after the attack. That there were, in fact, somebody had it written in chalk on the pavement right outside of Haggie Hall during that gathering. This wasn't something that was unexpected. It was that the folks in charge of us were not listening when we were saying that we are concerned and that there are flags. And so my question for all of us is, what do we do with the flags? First off, how do we ensure that we pay attention to folks that are saying there were flags? And how do we honestly do that? And then what do we do with all of these flags that are flying willy-nilly all over the place? And some of the flags are things that we sort of dismiss and we're like, oh, it's not that important. So for instance, in times that I've taught, not here, I've only been here for about 5 minutes, but in other places that I have taught, I'm asked to teach courses on equity, on diversity, on pedagogy, because my background is in education, and on race, because a lot of my research is focused on how racism operates in different places and how race operates in different places. And inevitably, when I get the feedback from my students, they write, she talks too much about race. Now, under normal circumstances, we can say, who cares, right? But currently, as an assistant professor who has to build a tenure portfolio, those flags are very real for me. And I'm not saying flags are very real because I want to make sure that I pass tenure. Of course, I would love to be able to still hang out with folks here. They're very lovely in my department. But the flags are real. Like if you're offering courses that are talking about race and racism, and the students are responding, why are we talking about race and racism? Right? If we have courses that are talking about trans lives, even if we're not doing them as well as folks think that we should, but we are trying as those in charge and responsible for building curriculum. And trans students are saying, this isn't reflecting what I need. Then how can we take that information seriously and recognize those flags? If we have assignments that we are developing in class, and students are writing to us, and they're only writing to you as the prof, right? So they're writing to us with their final assignments or midterm assignments or whatever, and they're saying things that are making us wonder about how much they value the other, she says with air quotes. Then those are flags. But what do we do with them? Because I'm worried that this notion of free speech that's sort of pushing through everything is actually stopping us from taking a stand on things. And maybe that's just me, a Black woman in an anti-Black world that's navigating her feels. Or maybe I'm actually touching on something that's really important for us to pay attention to. Once upon a time when I thought to myself, okay, university might be the place for you, because I was like, you gotta grow up, lady, you gotta grow up. Part of what I was drawn to was the idea that I could be in a space where I could take a stand, not that I could be in a place where free speech would allow people to dedicate their lives and careers to deciding whether or not I have intelligence. Stick a pin in that. I have so many pins. Stick a pin in that to say that once upon a time I was in an African philosophy class. It was at York University. I was very excited about this class. And I say it was at York because it was the only African philosophy class that I had ever seen in my life at the time. Half of the class, and it was only a semester, was spent on one question. Do African people have a philosophy? Now, it wasn't just that a prof had decided this was a question, shall we ponder it? But there were writings, books, dedicated articles, literature that was supporting this one question. Do African people have a philosophy? If that's our starting point inside of these classes, and then that is supposed to be positioned as a place to demonstrate to somebody like me that actually you do belong, then I'm telling you, it's a flag. And I'm telling you, it's not working. Because for me to spend half of my class trying to explain to people that Black folks are bright, that there are whole civilizations of us all over the globe who have thought thoughts, they still think thinks, they write things, they do stuff, they govern themselves. But if I have to have a class that demonstrates that, then I have a question. I have a question about how we think about curriculum. I have a question about what we think universities are meant to do. And I have a desire. And I'll end with my desire because I like to try and stay as optimistic as I possibly can. My desire is that we build universities that take stands, that actually do draw some lines in the sand, that say, no, we're not actually debating whether or not a person is human. We're not going to debate whether or not trans lives matter, Black lives matter, Indigenous lives matter. We're not going to do that. We're going to start with the assumption that you didn't come here thinking that that's a valid debate. Instead, you're coming here to grapple with the thoughts that all of those folks have that you have missed out on because we have a curriculum from kindergarten that never taught you about it. And so welcome to my class. Let's go have some fun.